Hi, welcome back to Gen Z Bible class, where today we're continuing our story of Jacob and Esau. And we understand now from what we've seen so far that these two brothers just did not get along very well. In spite of the fact that they were twins, I mean, they shared the same womb, but the Bible made it clear that even while they were in their mother's womb, they were like fighting with each other. And, the whole thing ends up with this contention, and it got so bad that Esau vowed that when his father Isaac died, that he would kill his brother Jacob, and it was that bad. And of course, Jacob had deceived him. He had taken his birthright, his rightful inheritance from him, and then he tricked his father Isaac into giving him his blessing as well. So the blessing and the birthright were both lost by Esau. And so he had a good reason to hate his brother. And it was just a matter, he didn't want to dishonor his father or, send his father to the grave with this terrible thought of Esau killing his brother Jacob. So he was going to wait until his dad passed away. Then he was going to kill him. Of course, Rebekah, who loves Jacob, gets wind of it, and she realizes, I guess the gig is up. It's time for Jacob to hit the road and just to protect himself. So that's basically where we are in the story at this point. But we're going to continue on now, and basically what this part of the story is how Jacob ends up finding his wife. His wife is Rachel, and he finds her in a very similar way that Isaac was able to come together with Rebekah. And remember, Abraham sent his servant back to the old family homestead so that they could find a wife from within the family, and that's exactly what happened for Isaac. So Rebekah becomes his wife, and now the same thing is going to happen with Jacob. He's going to go back to the same place, the same family, and find a wife for himself, who will turn out to be Rachel. So, what happens? Well, let's begin by reading actually the very last verse in chapter 27, where it says that Rebekah said to Isaac, "I am disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living." Of course, remember now that Rebekah loves Jacob. He is the apple of her eye. I don't know if she had the same concern about Esau. Maybe she didn't care what happened to him. And as we're going to see, he's not all that worried about who he marries himself. But she's very concerned about Jacob. And I think this is in keeping with the fact that she understands the spiritual nature of what's going on here, in that Jacob is the one that was intended to receive the promise that was given to Abraham and Isaac, and now it was going to be carried on down to Jacob. And Jacob is kind of adjusting to the fact that this was thrust upon him, I guess you could say. Now, it was easy to receive the inheritance and all of the physical blessings that came with that. It was easy to receive the blessing of his father, but I'm not so sure if he was quite ready to accept this role that he would play as the recipient of the promises that were made to Abraham and his father Isaac, because that's kind of a whole different category. That has to do more with spiritual things than just physical things. And I think we're going to find that in this part of his life, he's going to come to terms with this new role that he's asked to play. Well, anyway, Rebekah is very concerned. She wants him to find a wife, not from amongst these Hittite women. And Isaac is in agreement with this. Now, I'm thinking that probably Jacob didn't leave immediately. Rebekah told him, "You have to leave," but I think there's still some time before, because Isaac here is still alive. He's still with us, and he will pronounce another blessing on Jacob, and he will, in fact, agree with Rebekah that this is something that Jacob should do, that he should go down to the family down south and find a wife from that family group. And this is exactly what is going to happen. So probably, I'm guessing that maybe Isaac, even though he was deceived by his son Jacob, made peace with him, and maybe eventually he kind of came to sense that this was the right way to go. But at any rate, he pronounces this additional blessing on his son Jacob before he goes off to find a wife. So he says in verses 3 to 5, "May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. May he give you and your descendants the blessing given to Abraham, so that you may take possession of the land where you now reside as a foreigner, and the land God has given to Abraham." And this was kind of Isaac's way to send Jacob off on this journey. And I think it's probably good because it reminds Jacob of this whole dimension, as we said, of his life that kind of sets him apart from other people. So what's going on with Esau at all this time? Well, we read a little bit about him, and what we find out about him, I think, is more of a reason to acknowledge the fact that he probably shouldn't have received this blessing that he lost out on. So now Esau, verses 6 to 9, learned that Isaac had blessed Jacob and had sent him to Padan Aram to take a wife from there, and that he blessed, and when he blessed him, he commanded him, "Do not marry a Canaanite woman," and that Jacob had obeyed his father and mother and had gone to Padan Aram. Esau then realized how displeasing the Canaanite women were to his father Isaac. So then what does he do? And this is where we learn something about Esau, and I would have to say his rebellious nature, that he was probably angry with his father after his father had been deceived and tricked. And even though his father loved him, I think he was still a little angry, and he expressed it by doing exactly what his parents didn't want. Oh, my little goody two-shoes brother, they don't want him to marry a Canaanite woman. Well, I'll show them. And he goes off and intentionally marries one of the descendants of Ishmael, who was not, approved by Abraham and Rebekah. And I think it was really an act of defiance. And again, it shows us something of the rebellious nature within his heart, that he was just willing to do this to spite his parents and go off and marry this Canaanite woman. So I guess it just gives us reassurance that Jacob was the right one to choose. But what happens next? So Jacob leaves, and then this is another one of these really big stories in the Bible, the thing that happens next. In verse 11, when he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Wow, I mean, not many people have visions like that. But we do know that God spoke to Abraham, he spoke to Isaac, and this was another episode, I guess, of God speaking, revealing himself, in this case to Jacob. And I think it's a very key time in Jacob's life because, everything just kind of got turned upside down. Now, he deserved, the judgment that came upon him, as we said before. The fact that he was willing to deceive his father resulted in him having to leave the family. You be sure that your sins will find you out. And, when you make bad decisions, they'll always come back to bite you. So he got what he deserved, but now he's off on his own, and he doesn't have mom and dad to encourage him. And, that's a big time in a person's life. A lot of Gen Zers go off to college, and it's the first time that they've ever been independent. And that's a time when you have to make some really important decisions about who you are. You're not living off of mom and dad's reputation anymore. You might be living off their bank account, But you got to decide who you are. And I think this was a key time, and maybe that's why God appears to him on his way down to find his wife. I mean, this is a big change in his life. He's going to get married. He has left his family behind. He's going into a strange land, and this is big change in his life. And it's times like this that I think God uses to shape us and to maybe challenge us a little bit to think about who we are and what direction we're going. So God appears to him in this dream, and he reassures him. He basically reiterates all the promises that he made to Abraham. And he said, this is really what the main thing that you have inherited from your father and your grandfather. But he also makes him a very specific promise within this dream. So he's seeing God in this dream, the stairway to heaven, and it must have been something that he never forgot. But when God was speaking to him, he concludes by giving Jacob this promise: I am with you and will watch over you where you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So God is reassuring him of a number of things. Number one is that he will be with him. And I'm sure that must have meant a lot to Jacob, because, as we said, he's no longer under mommy and daddy's protection. He's out there on his own. So knowing that God promises he would be with him is got to be important to him. But he won't leave him. But he said that I will bring you back to the land that you left. And that must have given him some real encouragement and some real hope. Because when he left, I mean, in his own mind, this was it. He probably would never get to go back at least as long as his brother Esau was alive. But this must have been helpful to him to kind of put things in perspective and know that God said he will go back to the land that he left. Well, he wakes up and he makes he takes the stone that he was sleeping on. I'm not sure if I would have picked a stone to sleep on, but I guess they were tough back in those days, and stone worked as well as a pillow. But he takes that very stone and he builds a little altar, and he pours oil on it, and he said this is a special place dedicated to God, and he renames it Bethel, which is, I guess that makes sense to do something like that, because that's something that, he saw it as being like the gateway to heaven. So this is how you get to heaven. I saw the stairs that go to heaven. Of course, this was just part of the vision that he saw. But now he makes a vow to God. And I think this is maybe the most important thing about this whole part of the story. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you have given me, I will give you a tenth. What this is telling me is that Jacob had not really in his heart committed himself to following God. And it's almost like he's setting up this deal with God. He said, well, you promised me you're going to take care of me. Now, if you really do that, if you really prove yourself, then I will dedicate my life to following you. Probably the lesson there is that we don't inherit our parents' faith. Like you heard this expression, God has no grandchildren. Because every person has to come to the point in their life where they're going to decide. You might have, maybe your parents are dedicated Christians and your whole family are, but the way this whole Christianity thing works is that each person individually has to come to a point in their life where they say, yes, I believe you, God, and I am going to commit my life in obedience to you. And this is really the significance of this decision that Jacob is making here at this point, this very crucial point in his life. And this was a life-changing experience. So what happens next? Well, the story ends with him meeting his wife. How does that happen? Very similar to the way that Abraham's servant found the wife, Rebekah, for Isaac. He goes to the same, maybe it was even the same well, but he ends up at this well. And, that's probably a good place to start your search, because everybody comes to the well to water their sheep. And, he probably had some livestock of his own that needed watering. And the shepherds all gathered there, and they're waiting for the stone to be taken off the well. I'm not sure what that was all about. Maybe, there was a control on who could use the well. And Jacob, decides to take matters into his own hand, and I guess maybe as a sign of his authority, removes that stone himself so that they could feed their sheep. And it's at this point, and this is where, the romantic part of the story comes, that Rachel shows up. And Rachel is a shepherd like all the others. She's, taking care of sheep, very similar to Rebekah, who was concerned about the camels, and this was the type of lifestyle that they lived. And when he saw her, I think maybe, I don't know if a little bell went off in his head, but there's verses 9 to 12 kind of describe this situation. While he was still talking with the shepherds, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. And then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. This must have been such a meaningful experience to him, because when he left, he didn't have a clue what was going to happen. And he was commissioned to go find, a person. He didn't know her name. He didn't know who she was. He'd never been to this place before. And at this moment, when he sees her, and when he sees what he knows to be the fulfillment of his commission to find a wife, it must just have overwhelmed him. Well, Laban finds out about all this, and of course Laban was involved in that whole first thing when his sister was taken away. So he approves of the whole thing. He's accepted by the family, and everybody agrees that this is the right thing to do. So the situation now is that Jacob has to make some arrangements. And by that I mean he knows he's going to be spending some time here. He's not ready to turn around and go back home as long as his brother Esau is still alive. Eventually he will make that trip back, but he knows he's got to have to make some arrangements for his staying there in this new land with the rest of his family. And so he talks things over with his uncle Laban, and they come to an agreement. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel." They did make this specific arrangement, and Jacob committed himself to 7 years of labor, and then he could marry the love of his life, Rachel. Isn't that romantic? And it says that those years flew by because, he was so in love with Rachel. And this is where we're going to end the story today. But there's a few glitches that come into this arrangement that we're going to read about next time. But again, we come to the point, what have we learned about ourselves today? What have we learned about God, about how he does things? And I think one of the things we learn is that being in God's will isn't always easy. Just think about the things that Abraham was called to do. Sacrifice your son and Isaac and now Jacob, and he finds himself as part of being in God's will, on the run and stepping out into this unknown, and his future just kind of falling apart. Everything that he had planned no longer was, going to come to be. What's the good of having this inheritance if you have to run away? It's kind of like, maybe that's the irony in this whole thing. He got the inheritance, but that it really didn't do him that much good. And maybe that was, payback for some of the deceit that he had been involved in. But here he is in this new land, and he makes this arrangement. And I think perhaps the real lesson is around this area of everybody making a decision, where he comes to the point where he's forced to make this decision. Am I going to follow through with this? Am I going to accept this part of my inheritance, that spiritual part, where the promises God made to his grandfather and his father were passed on down to him? That was actually different than the blessing and the birthright. This was a whole new dimension to his life. And it seems like at this point, and maybe it was here when he meets his wife and he sees God fulfilling all his promises. He's wondering, how am I going to eat? He lost everything. He didn't have anything with him. And now he sees, this is my new home. I can see how God is taking care of me. I made this agreement with my uncle. And now things are okay. I can live with this. And at this point, he is reassured that making this decision to follow God is the right thing. So that would be a great lesson for us to take away with this, that we all make decisions. And the most important decision we make is how much we're going to include God in our lives. Are we going to honor him? Are we going to follow him and follow his teachings and follow his commands? And that's a pretty important lesson to learn, how important these decisions are. And those of you who are, in this Gen Z area, that's pretty much what your whole life is about right now, making all these important decisions. So I hope that, we can all learn a lesson from that. I'm still making decisions about my own life and what to do, and that whole process never really ends. But I hope this this is an exciting story, and it doesn't end here. There's more to come. So I hope you'll be able to join us next time as we continue on looking at the life of Jacob. Next time on Gen Z Bible Class.